Good evening. I'm Hancock County Commissioner Antonio Lacey, here to welcome you as Community Union League of Women Voters and the Ellsworth American present the second Primary Candidates Forum. Here's our moderator, Stephen Fay.
Thank you. I'll go quickly into the rules. Welcome, Stephen Joy, Bill Clark, good to see you. We do invite people present to submit a 3x5 card with a question. It'll go through Ann, and she'll submit it to me. And after the candidates have addressed the questions we've put to them, there'll be an opportunity for me to present additional questions to the candidates. There will be a timekeeper to keep us at 1.5 minutes for responses to initial questions, 2-minute opening. And
pick it up.
Let me go into that just a little bit. For each question, response is limited to 1.5 minutes. So if I were to ask you a question, Bill, and then after the candidate responds to the question, the moderator or the other candidate will have 30 seconds to ask a follow-up question, if they choose to do so. And the responding candidate will then have an additional 1 minute to address the follow-up question. The original question will then pass to the second candidate, and the format will be repeated. I will be paying attention to the timekeeper, but I will not cut anybody off in mid-sentence. The idea is just to keep the evening moving along. And we have a procedure of alternating speakers, so I believe that Bill Clark is the first, will make the opening statement. You all set? You'll be making it, and then followed by Steve Joy. And Steve Joy, when we get to the questions, will address the first question first. The audience should know that the candidates have been provided with these questions in advance, so they know what they're going to be asked. And that's probably it. A question from the audience may be posed to a single candidate, but both candidates will be given the opportunity to respond. Anything I'm missing, Ann? All right. Then with no further, Bill Clark, would you please make your opening?
Thank you. My name is Bill Clark. I'm a resident of Ellsworth, a lifelong resident of Hancock County. I retired in December of 2014 after 43 years in law enforcement, the last 34 as the Hancock County Sheriff. I have devoted my time since then as president of the Woodbine Cemetery Association, and I do their maintenance in the summer and act as their sexton, working with visitors at the cemetery in the wintertime. I am president of the Ellsworth Snowmobile Association, and most years, some years, whatnot, that keeps me pretty active. Last winter I was a little bored, but I'm always, in my later years as county sheriff and whatnot, I always thought maybe I would make a run at county commissioner. Having sat on that side of the table for 34 years, I wanted to look at the other side for a while. And if elected and whatnot, my goals and whatnot is to try to strengthen the process in our finance department, making that those processes stronger and keeping good bookkeeping procedures in place. I also am going to be committed to, and this is a buzzword that everybody seems to use and nobody follows up, but it's transparency. I want to be diligent with Maine's right-to-know law, and even though going to county commissioner's office meetings and whatnot is like watching paint dry sometimes, it's still, I'd like to see our records and our minutes, our agenda and our minutes reflect exactly what went on, not only and so that everybody has access to that information. I also bring to the Commissioner's office for the first time, as anybody can remember, an opportunity for a person who has spent 3 decades as a department head to now become a commissioner, and I'm hoping that that is going to really improve and stabilize the relationship between management and the commissioner's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Steve Joy, 2 minutes.
Well, what I would say is it has been an honor to serve the residents of Hancock County over these last 7.5 years as a county commissioner. I come along behind commissioners over the last 200 years who went before me. In fact, county commissioners were in the state of Maine before it was the state of Maine. And also there was a sheriff. We sort of were born at the same time. And again, before even the county seat moved here to Ellsworth, it was in Castine. One of the things that they did is they would seat the judge, and the sheriff would bring whatever outlaw he had caught or in, and then at some point they needed to build a jail. And so they had to raise funds to build a jail. And I would say to you is that there was a problem then like there is now, in that it was not easy to raise those funds. We still do have a sheriff's department. We have a jail, but it is larger. We have a sheriff's department, but it is larger. We have a registry of deeds and a registry of probate. We have many employees, and many of the documents now are online. We have courts with judges. We have the DA's office. We have a UT office, a Maine Drug Enforcement office, emergency management. I mean, some people are not even aware of some of the things that we do in county government. I would say that I am looking forward to, we have now hired a county administrator, which has helped. We've been part-time, and there are goals that would like to be put into place. But one of the things that happens is we are part-time commissioners, and sometimes life gets in the way of the goals that you've set for both yourself and your own family, your own business, or in your county government time. So I'm looking forward to doing it for 4 more years. Thank you.
Thank you. How is the timing working for you gentlemen?
That was fun.
That system work all right? Okay, thank you. The first question is going to go to Steve Joy. And I might say that this will be the shortest and simplest question. You've already previewed them, so I think you might know what I'm talking about. Here's the first question. Given that there are limited resources in the county budget, what role, if any, should the county play in addressing the epidemic of opioid misuse, and what measures or interventions do you personally support? Steve Joy.
Now, one of the things that we've been doing is I sit on the Lighthouse Board, which just renovated a house here in Ellsworth for 6 people that are going through the drug court. And when they are convicted felons. And if they choose not to go to jail, they can go through the drug court. And so one of the things that we felt was that we needed to also remove them from the environment in which they were becoming addicts. And now with this new place open, we have come to realize that that is another incentive for them to stay clean. These people go to AA and NA every day. They work diligently to try to stay clean. Don't get me wrong, not everybody gets through the program, but the resident may help to give them some more support and to get them away from the environment that they were in. The other is we would like to use some of the community benefit funds. We're already looking at $25,000 to $50,000, and we would try to put those in place for counseling within the jail. We've also looked at Suboxone, whether that is something that is in the future. We're looking at residential. We're looking at, I spoke to you the other day about Scarborough and their program, and they're sending people to residential programs. I would say to you, I agree with it. I just don't know. I'm not sure where they're getting their funding.
Mm-hmm. Good, thank you. Bill Clark, would you like to hear the question again?
No, I'm fine with that, Steve. Thank you. As Steve alluded to, treatment is really going to be the key if we're ever going to make any headway with the addiction problem. We talk often about the 3-legged stool, and in the addiction problem, they talk about the 3-legged stool as being law enforcement, treatment, and prevention. Right now, the Hancock County is fortunate. And back in 2004, I mustered up the chiefs. We got together. We went to the towns and whatnot, and they supported us putting $200,000 in the budget to start a local drug task force. We put that together with the state's task force, and today that is still running. I might comment, too, that was $200,000 of tax money in 2004. Today, that tax money, county tax money, is $125,000. Now, I defy you to find any program where government got involved 13 years ago in a program, and it's actually less tax money today than it was when they started. Unfortunately, treatment, the professionals are saying that there are no reliable, creditable treatment programs out there for addiction. It's truly tragic, but we should be putting our money into treatment and not into prevention any more than bringing the health issues into a school system. And so I would like to see the county devote more of their resources to treatment, and we have one of the best facilities around an open door recovery center, and put that money towards perhaps beefing up their programs.
Thank you. Question 2. On veto day last month, the legislature overrode a gubernatorial veto of additional funding for the state's jails over the next 2 years, an outcome applauded by local sheriffs. On a continuing basis, what is your assessment of the adequacy of the county budget to cover funding for our jails? What role, if any, should the state play in sharing this cost? What changes, if any, would you make to this budget priority? Bill Clark, you first.
Back in the late 80s, there was a common sentencing practice by the Superior Court called shock treatment. They would actually take an individual who committed and was convicted of a felony charge and send them to the state prison for 5 or 6 days. They thought maybe that would shock them into reality. The problem is they used this so often, there was a revolving door in Thomaston Prison that made it just unworkable. As a result, the state came to the counties and said, if you will hold all convicted felons who are sentenced to 1 year or less in the county jails, we will pay you for that. Now, since the late 80s until now and whatnot, they have tried to change that as a subsidy. They've tried to call it a subsidy. I have spent all my years as a sheriff and whatnot saying it isn't a subsidy, it's a reimbursement, it's a payment for services rendered. That is what the state should continue to pay. That is what should happen today, and they should continue to pay at the rate that it costs the counties. And as far as the who should run the county jail, I can tell you from experience, it should be either the county or the state. There's never going to be a marriage by the state and county that's ever going to work.
Thank you. Steve Joy?
Well, one of the things that has been a problem is it's all about the money. And so what happened is the state, at the last minute in this last bill, which they just went through, they cut the money from $16.7 million down to $14.2 million. The next thing they did is they changed how they will send the money to the jails. They switched to an average daily population, whereas before they did it on budgets. What I would say is it created a shortfall for Hancock County. So you asked what we're going to do. I would tell you that what we've done is we've accepted federal prisoners. Bill did when he was the sheriff. We still continue that practice today. That helps to subsidize our budget. I would say that we have to look at perhaps the future is a consolidated jail, maybe with Penobscot, maybe with Washington, maybe with all three of us. What would happen in that regard is what would happen is you would get a more energy efficient jail, and then you would also get a more efficient jail, which maybe there are different things that make the jails more efficient. And what drives these budgets are personnel services. Of the $80 million spent on the jails every year, about 62 to 65 million of it is personnel services. So you have to find a way to decrease that. I would say that is probably in our future somewhere.
Steve, excuse me, can I comment to that? I mean, I absolutely agree with Steve on this, that if we're going to turn the clock back, instead of building a new jail here in 2000, which, by the way, we built a jail in the 1800s. It's right there, it's a historical society. We put another jail in 1979 underneath the courthouse and whatnot. And then in 2000, we built a new jail where it is now. We're the only county where we have 3 jails on the same site. But anyways, if I could have turned the clock back, I would have loved to experimented with the idea of getting together with Waldo County and Penobscot County and built a regional jail somewhere over in just the other side of the Bucksport Bridge over there and had that, because I agree with Steve, the economy of scale would have kicked in and whatnot. And so we would have had the ability to regionalize and perhaps saved money instead of the jails that we all have.
Thank you. Steve, you got a rejoinder if you'd like?
And I would just say that we don't see it up here much, but they built Two Bridges Jail. They built a big jail in Somerset County. Penobscot County is in need of a jail right now. I think they had 208 people in 156 or 160 permitted facility. So we've got too many people in our jails. And I mean, one of the things that I would say, we're looking at now pretrial services. We're looking at whether they can wear ankle bracelets, whether we can do different things to get some of the people out of our jail. And so, but back to the other one, really that's probably what's in the future under the circumstance we're in right now. I'd like to see the state fund to 16.7 and then have the county pick up from there going forward.
Okay. Thank you. We'll go on to the third prepared question, and Steve, you're going to be answering first, and here it is. When wind turbines were erected in Township 16, the Hancock County Commissioners negotiated a community benefit and TIF, tax increment financing agreement, in the amount of approximately $315,000 per year for the next 20 years. Of that amount, approximately $200,000 per year is designated for community benefits. The purpose of the community benefit funds is for property tax reduction, economic development, land and natural resource conservation, tourism promotion, the reduction of energy costs, and to help the disadvantaged. What would be your priorities for use of these funds? What changes, if any, would you make to the process by which proposals for using this money are brought forward and considered by the commissioners? Steve.
I'm going to speak a little bit to the TIF money first. What's interesting, you said $315,000 through Maine Revenue Services. They've already reduced the TIF funds to about $95,000. So the community benefit funds are set at $200,000. But I think there was some pressure from the governor to reduce that. What I would also say, what we've done is we've helped some local charities and municipalities with things that they have need. Lately we have used many of these funds for tax reduction. We have tried to leverage the funds by giving priority to organizations who could get matching funds. We used TIF money to improve communications in northern and eastern Hancock County. We worked with Fairpoint Communication to bring high-speed internet to Fletcher's Landing Township. We have purchased heating oil. We're working on leasing tower space to improve radio communication in western Hancock County. And some services that we've looked at or would like to talk about at least is the RCC, the Regional Communication Center that we have. If you haven't noticed, the Ellsworth Police Station is right here. They're doing dispatch. The sheriff's and the Regional Communication Center is about 200 yards that way. They're doing regional communication. I think that at some point we should bring some of these together. Bucksport has their own. Southwest Harbor, there are others too, and I think that we should work to supply some funds for that. Ooh, that was quick.
Thank you. Bill Clark.
Steve hit upon the biggest thing. Look, they've got a wide variety of categories that you can apply for this money, and there are as many opinions out there as to how to spend that as there is categories and more. But I do agree that as you're looking at the grant applications and whatnot, that you should try to prioritize those that use it as matching or seed money. If you can take $50,000 to a grant recipient who can turn that into $250,000, that's where we ought to focus our community benefits money on. But while we're talking about community benefits, if you remember in my opening statement, I talked about my concerns about our finances within county government. And this is an area, whatnot, that makes me anxious about our finances. We have the county claims that they have $396,000 in their community benefits account sitting there right now. But the finance people said that they're waiting for the auditor to tell them whether or not there is in fact $200,000 so that they can award recipients for 2016. Halfway through the year, we still haven't awarded any of our TIF community benefits money, and it makes me anxious that they have to have an auditor reassure them that their bookkeeping practices are accurate enough to give out $200,000 when they claim they have $396,000. This is just an example of the anxiousness I have about our finance department.
Thank you.
If I could speak to that.
You can.
We actually have $460,000 in community benefit funds, and we've frozen $450,000 to be used to reduce taxation for 2016. If once we have had the auditor in to tell us that there is some surplus or there is some unexpended funds, then we will release some of those community benefit funds. But until then, we've dedicated them to reduce taxation for 2016.
The county will hire an auditing firm and whatnot to check for compliance to bookkeeping practices to make sure that all the money is safe and so on. They don't hire an auditor to do the bookkeeping for them. They shouldn't need an auditor and whatnot to tell them that their bookkeeping practices are sound enough that they can award this benefit community money halfway through a budget year.
Okay, thank you. Those are our prepared questions. I have one question from the audience that I want to read. I think it's a good one and germane. Bill, you'll be speaking first. Some local agencies who serve all of Hancock County seek annual appropriations from the county to support their operations. How would you gauge the worthiness of such organizations and the level of county support?
Is this the third party? Is that the third
Yes,
party?
yes.
That's the third party. Again, there's as many people out there wanting tax money as there are ideas on how to spend it and whatnot. There is no way for me to sit here today and whatnot, especially having never sat on that board and listened to these people's presentation, but you'd have to simply evaluate those. And again, if I could find a recipient who could use our county tax money as seed money or match money, that would go a long ways towards how I would agree to spend that.
Thank you. Steve?
They do come to us. And at least for now, we have, over the last, I think most of the time that I have been there, except for maybe the first year or two, we have kept them flat funded. And we have continued to flat fund them. And we have not accepted new people asking. We may in the future. We did, through the community benefit program, give them another avenue on which they could ask for money. But they also did need to have matching funds as a priority. We ask for that every time. And so I would say that it's where we are. As you've listened to or you read the headlines here in Ellsworth, and you're seeing places where they now turn down school budgets and they say no new taxes and they do whatever, I think we have to look people in the eye and say, I'm not going to do any more, but I won't do any less. And that's where we are with that in the third-party donations.
Very good. Seeing no other questions from the audience, I'm going to invite the candidates to make their closings. The order of opening and closing was by drawing straws, and Bill Clark will go first.
You know, we could sit here, both Steve and I, could sit here all night long and talk to you about county government. Unfortunately, it's kind of like the government agents, the government level that nobody's interested in. Everybody wants to know the local property taxes, and they get involved in their local issues for those reasons and whatnot. And then we go to the state and we hear from our governor, we hear from our legislature and whatnot. But county government and whatnot is kind of like the quiet government. But I tell you, we play an important role. And I think my priority is to first identify those responsibilities that statute has given us and do a good job with those so that the legislature doesn't have to come back and say, because you didn't, we're going to give those out to somebody else. A good example is that the Sheriff's Department has their Civil Process Division. The Civil Process Division are the people that serve your divorce papers, your bad papers for your bills, your papers for debts you didn't pay, and so on. That, by statute, most of those papers must be served by a deputy sheriff. They can't be served by your local police, the state police. They can't be served by a private detective. That's the responsibility they've given the county and whatnot. And I'm concerned over the years and whatnot that Hancock County, whatnot, has marginalized that responsibility to the point of where they want it to be self-sufficient. Now, they get paid fees for those papers, and they're saying we only want to give you what you can make. Unfortunately, that's today that isn't possible. And I think the county should step up and say, this is our responsibility given to us by the state, and we should meet that responsibility. We should do the best job that we can so that nobody later will come back and say, we need to have somebody else do this because you're not doing a good job.
Thank you. Steve Joy?
Well, what I would say is one of the things, we've increased our budget in the 8 years that I've been there about 2.5%, 2.6% in total for the 8 years. In fact, 3 years in a row it had a negative increase. And so I think, how did we do it? I'll tell you that we refinanced the jail from a 4.5% interest rate down to about 2.175 to save $250,000 in interest. We switched the whole campus over to propane in the last few years. And so we've almost paid for the conversion in the first 2 years that we converted. We did a $230,000 energy grant, which implemented new lighting, new whatever, and at the time, some of it's still mercury vapor. We've also changed over to heat pumps everywhere that we can. We're doing things like that to save money, because there are things that do increase. Personnel services, we have about 80 to 85 full-time jobs with benefits, full-time benefits. And so we're a good employer here in Hancock County. We are an engine here too, because of those people that work and make a good living here. There is overtime in our budgets. You'll see there is no overtime. I can't tell you I'm a proponent of that, but I would just tell you it's in our budget, and so it has happened. So we're doing a lot with a little. The jail is going to be an issue, and people, that's the one that there's about a 300 to, Bill will give you a better or a different number, $300,000 to $500,000 shortfall if we do not get the money from the state. And so that's a lot to make up in any given time. They allowed us to increase our budget by 3% this year, but that was all. And there is a shortfall, and it's not a balanced budget in the jail this year, but we're still working on it.
Very good. Any other questions? Thank you. I thought you were both very articulate. Good statements. Hello, everybody. Here we are for the second part of this evening's forum. And up front are two Democratic candidates for State Senate, District 7, Moria O'Neill and Ted Koffman. I'll bet everybody remembers the ground rules. There's a timekeeper up here, and I will not be cutting anybody off mid-sentence. And I was talking with a fellow organizer, and next time we do this, we'll give you, the candidates, more time. So we'll try to be looser. But the point is that you get to make your points. The candidates drew straws for who goes first with opening statements, and Moria O'Neill will go first, followed by Ted Koffman, and then we're going to alternate back and forth. I already have one question from the audience, a good one, which I will introduce after the candidates have addressed the three prepared questions which you have had time to reflect on. Okay, I think that's it. Moria O'Neill, you have 2 minutes for an opening.
Thank you, Steve. Good evening, everybody. I want to thank tonight's sponsors for the opportunity to participate in this important event. I want to thank Ted for being here. It's a great opportunity to speak. tonight, and I also want to thank the audience for being here because, to quote Thomas Jefferson, whenever people are well-informed, they can be trusted with their own government. So tonight's an opportunity to become well-informed. I had a good chat with Ted last January while he was deciding whether to run against me, and we agreed that we would make a great team with our shared values and different experiences. But we can't elect a team to the Senate, so the voters are going to have to decide. So the criteria that I would suggest you use to decide on your primary vote is, number one, which candidate is more likely to beat the incumbent? And for 2 more years are going to be too long to proceed helplessly against the governor's devastating veto. So we must campaign to win, and that means choosing a candidate with the strength and energy to fight for the seat. The second is that we have to determine the kind of expertise and experience we want at the table representing us on issues in the legislature. So just a quick little bit about me to help your decision. I'm a registered nurse. I have a PhD from Yale University that makes me a doctor nurse. Everything I do is informed by a nursing viewpoint of problem solving and having been there with people through the worst and the best circumstances of their lives. In my career, I did hands-on delivery of care. I moved on to advocating for access to care for children with disabilities. And then in my role evolved to oversight of care and protection of human rights with a position at the Connecticut Office of the Child Advocate. That agency was very much like our Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability, in that it was an independent office who evaluated and held accountable any publicly funded services, in that case for children. So for the past 5 years, I've shared my love for public policy with student nurses, and I hope tonight to convince you that my unique experience makes me a good candidate, the best candidate for state senate. Thank you.
Thank you. Ted Koffman.
Well, thank you, Steve, for moderating, and Ann for her organization and facilitation. Usually when we speak about a legislator's record, we're thinking of specific bills that were passed or failed to pass. My bio that is in the program tonight speaks to some of the highlights of my legislative record: serving 8 years in the House, chairing the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, chairing the Community Preservation Advisory Committee, and successful initiatives like the climate change legislation, Kids Safe Products Act, bills to protect public and private drinking water, a historic tax credit program, and an electric waste bill to recycle electric equipment, among other things. And my website, tedkoffman.com, gives a more comprehensive picture of that record, that legislative record. But another record I want to reflect upon in his opening remarks are, there is a record that you can't tally or see unless you were serving by my side in the legislature. And this record is less about passing bills and more about how to get things done collegially. I call it legislative temperament, the ability to bring people together for a common purpose and find workable bipartisan solutions requires a positive can-do temperament. Having a sense of humor and a good dose of humility is essential. Earning the respect of the affection of the legislative staff is a sign that you have the right temperament. An effective chair encourages fellow committee members to take initiative, help manage hearings and work sessions, and engage all the interests who may speak in favor or in opposition to a bill. But at the end of the day, you want the public to feel that their voices were heard, their positions considered, and that they were treated with respect. So I'm running on 2 records. One is about passing significant progressive legislation. The other is intangible. It's about initiative and imagination, applying critical thinking and thinking out of the box, and bipartisan collaboration for the better good.
Thank you. Those are the opening statements. One of the ground rules or conditions that I wish I had brought up, but I'll bring up now, is I remind the candidates that you have the opportunity to respond to a response, and that original speaker can retort to that. I think it's 30 seconds for the response and a minute for the rebuttal. Question 1 will go to Ted Koffman first, and it is as follows. What do you think are the major policy differences between you and your primary opponent.
Well, Moria has expressed in some public meetings that I've attended a strong interest in policy supporting aging in place, which I think is a fantastic goal. Critical road construction and improvement, particularly in Route 15 and up in the Deer Isle, Brooklyn area, and interest in affordable care and expanding the Medicaid. On my part, the Affordable Care Act is a given. I worked on that when I ran for against Langley in 2014. But I served on the Democratic 2016 Platform Committee. My policy priorities are somewhat shaped by that. I want to continue to working. I worked on climate change when I was in the legislature. I worked on that in the Maine Audubon. I want to continue to prepare Hancock County and the state for expected severe rain events and changes in the ocean environment caused by climate change, supporting a stronger energy conservation building code, expanding access to higher quality internet service in Ellsworth, serving current and attracting new economic activity in our region, and creating incentives for developers who would build affordable workforce housing that could attract and retain younger skilled workers. And finally, it's supporting local sustainable farming by providing equal access to capital and technical assistance in marketing. A legislator may have high priorities. You can carry just so much of a portfolio in any particular year. I've listed 6 items that I care about a lot, and that's not the whole portfolio. So thank you.
Thank you. Moria O'Neill.
Thanks. The major differences between myself and Ted are in areas of expertise and experience that we would bring to the policy arena. The question is funny. It asked what are our difference between policy, but it's really what the major difference will be what we have behind us and how we work. My career is focused on public health, human services, and the evaluation of state services. The knowledge and skills I employed at the Office of the Child Advocate range from understanding human development and evaluating complex public financing of state programs, while the prime focus was ensuring the highest standard of care that included the regulatory environment, things like licensing and accreditation of institutions and professionals. I evaluated the management of the use of state resources. How was money being spent? What were work practices? These things may seem like they're a long way from health and safety, but in fact, I learned to be very diligent about the expenditure of people's money and the effectiveness with which it was spent. In the meantime, I mediated. I brought people to the table and found solutions where there may not have been even thoughts of finding solutions before. So I've argued that all public policy is health policy. For example, the effects on brain development by chronic hunger or the exposure of environmental toxins or violence will certainly impact policies on health and education. We'll need to treat, we'll need to adjust educational programs to accommodate disabilities, but public safety and even prison systems may also be impacted. All of that will affect state budgets, the workforce, and the tax base. So state governments are designed to provide services for people. In order to do so effectively, we need to understand the people and the environments they live in. We have to understand what works and what doesn't, and we have to determine what process is going to be most efficient. That's what that understanding and skill set is what I hope to bring to the position.
Thank you. Question 2, and Moria O'Neill, you'll be going first. The appropriate use of tax expenditures will be a topic for the next legislature, with the Office of Program Evaluation and Government Accountability set to make its first report. Given the controversy this year over corporate subsidies to biomass and solar power generators, not to mention continuing questions about BETE, BETR, and controversial subsidies to Kate Street and for wind generation, what do you think should be appropriate criteria for the state to use in determining when such subsidies are warranted? Do you think appropriate criteria were applied in these cases?
So I would suggest that you vote for anyone who can answer that question in 1 minute and 30 seconds. But just a little review. OPEGA reported 10 years ago that state investment in economic development weren't effective or efficient. There wasn't even a sufficient definition of what economic development is, and there was no oversight of the programs or even good data collection to report on them. It will be interesting to see what they're reporting in this upcoming report, but since that one came out, we've lost millions of dollars in the Kate Street debacle, and the doors have shut on hundreds of jobs. You can see why tax incentives are viewed as corporate welfare, because quite frankly, even in the biomass bailout, there may be a few Maine loggers who are still working, but most of the millions of dollars that are pouring in, that are being poured out of the state to corporate offices like places like in Louisiana, and that's not a good place for Maine money to be. We do need to incentivize business to grow our economy, but we need to do it carefully. The criteria for determining subsidies should be simple. If we need to know, are we incentivizing something that we want? Will it happen even if we don't incentivize it? In other words, why bother? And can we measure the outcome of this investment to be sure of the benefit? So we don't have the same kind of oversight process for tax giveaways as we do for tax-funded services. We should be looking at results-based accountability across the board, whether it's for road maintenance or for tax incentives. We need to define goals up front and account for achieving them to continue funding. Thanks.
Thank you. Ted Koffman.
Well, according to the recent Maine Economic Growth Council report, Maine is 36th in per capita income in the U.S., and we have the lowest incomes in New England. The state has an interest in relieving public burdens and meeting public needs, such as affordable workforce housing and affordable addiction treatment opportunities, for example. The Department of Economic and Community Development recently conducted a legislatively mandated review of the state development subsidies. A major conclusion is that current policies are scattered, overlapping, and confusing. It recommends a consolidation and simplification of programs, and I would start there. Establishing a more disciplined subsidy program guided by long-term economic priorities for Maine would apply due diligence, assessing potential successes and risks. Subsidies should be negotiated with well-defined, measurable outcomes over specific timeframes. The DECD evaluation also finds that a lot of programs, such as the Pine Tree Zones, are so scattered across the state that they are unlikely to accomplish their purpose of focusing development in places that need it most. How am I doing on time? 30 seconds.
35 seconds.
Whoa! Subsidies should invest in emerging businesses that have long-term prospects of success and growth and the potential to scale up in size, such as solar technology, applied biotechnology, breakthroughs in health field, boat building, agriculture, communication, and transportation. That said, a subsidy program must operate with the assumption that economic downturns and other unforeseen factors may impede progress toward business goals. So the idea of clawbacks when a business is not performing up to standard can actually trigger failure for the business if you take the resources away that you provide as a subsidy. So it's a very delicate thing. But I'll stop there. Thank you. Oh, it says
Thank
stop. Okay.
Okay, the third question, which you've had a chance to reflect on, and Ted Koffman goes first, is,
Thank you.
what was your view on the reforms made this year to restrict EBT card utilization for alcohol, lottery tickets, and cigarettes? Do you think additional welfare reform measures are called for? What measures would you support?
Well, the question asks for our views on the reforms made this year to restrict EBT card utilization. And I've listened to the shows on the radio about this. My understanding, though, of LD 1097 is that in addition to alcohol, cigarettes, and lottery tickets, which seems like a reasonable on face, the bill also prohibits the use of EBT cards for gambling, bail, firearms and ammunition, vacation, and tattoos and adult entertainment. I believe that citizens, including TANF recipients, should generally enjoy the freedom of choice and face the consequences of their choices, should they choose cigarettes or alcohol versus food or rent, for example. Some research suggests that 99.7% of TANF participants use their benefits as intended by the law. And some argue that the law will be cumbersome to enforce, burdensome to businesses, and not likely to reduce misuse of the federal program. The bigger issue is the lack of skilled workers to fill thousands of job openings in Maine. According to economic development officials, too few unemployed workers have the skills required to available jobs. Our challenge is to improve educational outcomes and equip future workers to participate in the 21st century economy. Maine has increased its percentage of associate and bachelor degrees in our population above the national average now, but we remain below New England. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
In 2015, over 130,400 EBT cards were issued. The most recent data that I can find is 81 cases of fraud were actually prosecuted successfully, and that was in 2014. So assuming that the numbers are somewhat close, that means 0.06% of people who were issued EBT cards were committing some kind of fraud. And one of them was apparently a woman who allegedly emptied bottles of water to get the deposits for cash to buy beer. My point here is that I understand the perception of poorly used public funds, but I'm trained to assess the magnitude of problems, to seek root causes, and determine whether solutions are needed. I'm not sure the problem is as the administration describes. I'm fine with putting restrictions on the use of EBT cards for purchases of things like cigarettes and lottery tickets. They're not really necessary purchases. I respect people who perceive abuse, but my experience with cash benefits is that they're generally not sufficient to cover the needs of a hungry family and are not often wasted, as Ted indicated with his statistic. I wonder if choosing the wrong tattoo merits the same kind of shaming treatment we witness towards a mother who gets to a checkout line with the wrong brand of cheese. We can't afford to have anyone in our communities hungry, and yet each day there are 200,000 Mainers who are. The cost of hunger is astronomical to individuals and to the state. As a policeman's daughter, I learned a long time ago that everyone should be held accountable for their actions. But while doing that, I know we must address root causes of the problems if we want to solve them. If a woman is poor enough and hungry enough to be eligible for food stamps, then pouring water out of bottles for a full 5-cent deposit to spend on beer sounds more of a greater problem than fraud. What I thought of when I heard the story was substance use disorder, and I wonder if anyone thought to ask that question. The administration's use of shame as a means to address poverty or disability is ineffective and, quite frankly, shameful.
Thank you. We have a number of questions from the audience. And Moria O'Neill, I'll start with you. Timekeeper, let's make this 2 minutes. If the ballot initiative to raise the minimum wage in Maine fails to pass in the November election, as a state senator, would you advocate or support other measures to raise the wages of the lowest earners? What are some of your ideas?
That's a great question. And I'm glad that it's on the ballot because it definitely is something that it's important to have the input from all of Mainers, and I hope that there'll be a good voter turnout so that we can really see a reflection of what's important to Mainers in terms of what wages people should earn. The minimum wage now is simply not sufficient for having a healthy and comfortable way of life. So it is really important that we raise that age. I know that there are some concerns here on the coast because we already have difficulties with filling jobs, particularly out on Mount Desert. Employers are already paying higher than the minimum wage because it's difficult to get people to go out there and work because of transportation issues, because housing is so expensive. So I know that there are concerns about that, and we're worried that if wages are raised elsewhere, will we still be able to hire people to come all the way out to Mount Desert? So it's definitely a multi-pronged problem that we have to resolve. We have to look at housing at the same time, and we have to look at improving transportation. But we cannot leave the minimum wage where it is. We have to raise it so that people will be able to survive and feed their kids.
Okay, thank you. Ted Koffman, would you like to hear that question again?
No, I'll answer the question.
Okay.
We're about 20 years overdue in raising the minimum wage. It was stalled decades ago, and as a consequence, the middle class has been hollowing out ever since. Part of our angst in our country today is that people are not living well and not getting a livable wage to support their families. They're working hard, sometimes working multiple jobs, and they just cannot keep up. So it's whatever way we have to go to do it, we need to increase the minimum wage. And it should be indexed, at least with the cost of living. What has happened is it's been stalled by Congress, and it's been locked into its current position. It's so unfortunate for working people to not see some improvement in their quality of life.
Thank you. This next question from the audience, we'll start with you, Ted Koffman. Hancock County has no public transportation. The only bus to Bangor, only on Friday morning. So, if you don't drive, it is impossible to get a job anywhere but Ellsworth. If elected, will you work on getting at least one bus a day from Bangor to Ellsworth?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, sure. I have a good friend who's an expert on transportation planning, and I'll be speaking with him tomorrow night. So I'll see what I can come up with an answer that's well studied. But certainly we have to do something about transit. I mean, we have the Explorer bus system on Mount Desert Island, but it's largely seasonal. But what a difference it makes to be able to catch a bus, and this is the way it should be. So I'd be happy to support it, and there are other communities like this that need that same sort of service. We've been sprawling out for 30 years from the downtown centers where we would be able to walk to work, and now people have to drive, and that's starting to change. But nevertheless, public transit would be very helpful.
Would you like to hear the question?
No, but I'm really glad that the question was asked, because as a person who for the last 4 years has been driving back and forth from Surrey to Bangor, it's clearly something that very personally that I could see the need for. There were a couple of, about maybe 2 months or so ago, the Hancock County Dems had someone come and speak about some of the economic development around the city of Ellsworth. And I have to confess that I'm terrible with numbers, so unless they're in front of me, I can't give them to you. Thousands of people who are commuting between Bangor and Ellsworth. So there's definitely a market for that. So finding a way to create some sort of a public transportation system, I think, would be great. It's probably difficult to figure out, when would that one bus be useful. So, and it's unlikely that one bus would be enough. But that's certainly worth looking. And as Ted says, speaking to experts on transportation will be helpful. But I also think that we can be looking at some sort of out of box kind of ideas and opportunities. In some states, the states run massive carpooling systems, where you can sign up at a public site, and people get even people that work for the state actually get discounts or tax credits for using that kind of a system. And also, it just makes it more easier and more flexible. If you get a group together, you get the use of a van. I know in Connecticut, they had Connecticut-owned vans that they made available for people who are carpooling across the state. So those kinds of things might be something that would be really reasonable for us to see here. And so I'm glad that question came up. And I know that the system out on Mount Desert is really wonderful. It's not just for tourists. A lot of the summer people who work out there rely on those buses to get back and forth. And so it's working out there. It's also more environmentally useful and beneficial because we don't have so many vehicles on the road. So I definitely think that that's something that we should be looking for. I love that idea.
Can I add a caboose to that?
Yes.
Only if it's not powered with fossil fuels.
Fossil fuel, yeah. Well, the Jackson Lab began to solve their problem of getting their workers from 4 counties to the lab on Mount Desert Island, partly because we don't have sufficient affordable housing. If you try and drive, to the Mount Desert Island around 4 o'clock, 4:30, you'll see the thousands of people pouring in all the way almost to the Trenton Bridge sometimes as they're trying to find their way to their homes out in the outer communities. So the lab came up with its own van system so that they could get their workers to work. So, clearly we need to do something. Maybe some of the employers would be willing to to participate and help finance that sort of a thing.
Mara, would you like to respond to that?
No, I think we can move on. It's
Very
just a
good.
great idea. I love that idea. The more you talk to people, the more you hear about these solutions of problems that are percolating up, and it's such a great opportunity.
And you're up first for this next question, which is addressed to you, but Ted, goes equally to you. You mentioned chronic hunger. What do you mean by that, and how much of a problem is that in Hancock County?
Well, just thinking about people being hungry around where we live is a very disturbing scenario for me. But we do have a serious problem. As I mentioned, there are 200,000 people who are hungry across Maine every day. There's a huge amount of children who are determined to be chronically hungry, which means that the family doesn't have enough for the basic staples of an alpha-healthy diet. So that's something that is something we really do need to be working on. There are local initiatives. There are the food pantries have been really busy. And what I think it's important to understand about how food pantries and Everybody Eats kinds of programs is that those are not people who are sitting home not doing anything. Generally, those are people who are working. But they're the people who are making that minimum wage, oftentimes working 2 jobs and still not making enough, so that at the end of the month they're just run out of resources to feed the family, and so they have to rely on that charitable donations. What I worry about charitable donations is that it can't be necessarily counted on to be consistent. And so so public systems do need to step in at some point and make sure that there's an infrastructure to be sure that the food is going along. But the one issue that really gets me upset is the thought that as the LePage administration has been working very hard to say that we're cutting costs around all these kinds of social programs. But what they mean by cutting costs is simply not spending. So there's a check for $1 million sitting on the governor's desk that's from the federal government that's earmarked only for feeding people, and the governor is not spending it. So we have people who are hungry, and we're not feeding them, and we're touting that as an accomplishment. And I don't agree. That's not an accomplishment when people are hungry.
Thank you. Ted?
Well, one out of 6 children are going hungry in Maine. And that's when I go to the grocery store and look at the kids that are there, you wonder how many of them are not getting really a good, nutritious meal every day. And the free and subsidized lunches are quite expanded now in our state. That's how some people get their really best meal. Part of this, though, is tied to the minimum wage question, the cost of transportation to get to work, and ownership of a car, and the health costs that we suffer because of our poor health care insurance position. So there are a set of circumstances that make some families have a harder time and not have the resources to take care of their children. That's really a shame, and it's avoidable.
Thank you. You're first on this next. Very straightforward question. Why do you think you can beat Brian Langley?
Well, I didn't think I could possibly lose last time. I was sure of it. I walked to a lot of doors, 4,000 of them. I moved back, actually, from Maine Audubon in 2014 early. I decided to retire so that I could come and run against Brian Langley, because a number of my former constituents, when I was in the House, would say to me, you got to take him on. He hasn't, supported the expanded Medicaid. They send me the videos of Langley on the floor of the Senate speaking some sort of illogic about why we couldn't afford to do this. But in any case, I guess I didn't do a very good job of convincing the electorate that this was a high priority for all of us, even if some of us have good insurance. It was also a year of bear baiting. Anybody remember bear baiting? Well, I have a tattoo on my chest, and it's a big bullseye that it remains here from the negative campaigning that Langley or the Republicans put out that I was against bear baiting. I never said a word about a bear. I never told a bedtime story about bears. And nevertheless, I got nailed for it. And they were very clever, and they're very, unfortunately, dishonest. And so that and a number of, some of you know them, a number of candidates. Bill Entwistle comes up to mind right away. But a number of really good candidates went down with me. It wasn't just my ship. It was a fleet of pretty good people who just couldn't withstand what was going on in 2014. I think they were in a different circumstance. And I can get into it because I don't know how many seconds I have left anyway. 5. Well, Bernie Sanders has probably stirred things up pretty well. People are thinking about things that they never thought could happen. And I think there's going to be some certainly hard right political effort, but I think that the electorate generally are not going to want to be trumping our high values and qualities. They're going to vote for Democrats this time around.
Thank you.
Just, I'll give you another minute, Ted, just to ask you, do you think that the Republicans will be less aggressive with whatever their tactics are, or do you have a strategy for how you would manage it differently this time?
Yeah, well, another phenomenon that took place in 2014, I think my race was one of the top 2 expensive races. And I wasn't paying the bills. There were outside interests, PACs and what have you. And some of them are allies. I mean, I share values. But their negative advertising backfired very seriously. And I found that when I got to the doors. Why are you sending these terrible things about Brian Langley? He's such a nice guy. I hadn't even seen the things. Can I see the thing? And they'd bring it to the door and say, oh my gosh. So, and after that election, a collection of us who didn't quite make it, I did more than didn't quite make it, but those of us who didn't make it got together to talk with a number of the nonprofits who are supporting progressives to explain that you need to understand the context in which you're putting out messaging. And in my case, they read it really badly. So I think we can do better with that. And I ain't afraid of it. I think we can do it.
Thank you. Your turn, Martha.
It's a great question, and it's an important question, and I'll tell you, not just running against Brian Langley, but even running against Ted Koffman is a challenge. It's always a challenge when you're running against someone that people like. And I've definitely found at the doors that I've been knocking on since January that people do like the sitting senator. And they also, I feel, because they like him, they don't actually pay attention to what he's doing. There are certainly a group of people who are aware of how he's voted against expanding Medicaid. But there are a lot of people who will say, he's a good guy, but I suppose if I paid attention, I wouldn't agree with the way he's voting. And so raising awareness of his voting record and bringing attention to some of these issues that are important to people is definitely a strategy that needs to be employed. I will say that since I've started, I've really been pleased to find there are a lot of folks who have come across the aisle on my behalf. There are people who have never been registered as Democrats before, who registered just so that they can vote in the primary. And there are Republicans who have told me that they wouldn't normally vote for a Republican, but they would vote for me. And I live in a pretty split neighborhood over in Surrey. And I've found that, of course, it helps when people know you, but I also find that even amongst Republicans, people are getting tired. And people are seeing the results of some of the policies that have taken place in the administration that our sitting senator supports. So I do think that there's certainly an opportunity there for bringing people over, and I think that I've shown the energy and the fresh voice when people are tired of people who have been around for a while. That's what Bernie is capitalizing on, and I think that it may actually help me a bit to be someone who's new. And I also think that people are recognizing that healthcare is one of the biggest budget items in this state. It's the fastest growing industry in this state. And so having a legislator who has some of that expertise to understand those systems will be of value. And so I think that that really does put me in a good position to win.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And this next question goes to you first, Moria O'Neill. What approaches will you support to deal effectively and efficiently with the addiction issues of Hancock County?
Yeah, that's a really tough problem, and I appreciated listening to the county commissioner candidates talking about it, because it again reinforced for me that addiction is touching everyone's life in Maine and probably across the country. I mean, this is more than an epidemic. This is a pandemic, and it's really a problem that affects us in so many ways. And there's also people who are really trying desperately to address this issue. But when you listen to people who are addressing it, you can actually see the multi-layers of intervention that may not necessarily all be coordinated. There's been no less than 5 or 6 commissioned reports in the last just couple of years. Here in the state, in Bangor did one, local municipalities are doing them, and there are some really good suggestions that are being made. But I think we do need to have more of an effort that consolidates a lot of this to make sure people are using resources the best way they can, to make sure that we're addressing it the best way we can. Definitely, this is not a policing matter. By the time we get to the police, it's too late. So we need to be moving back towards prevention. What we understand about opiates and heroin is that it actually changes the DNA in your brain. So quitting drugs is a huge, huge undertaking. We need to get folks not to use them in the first place. We need to change practices of providers who are prescribing opiates, and we need to help young people understand how to make good decisions rather than taking risky ones. And then on top of that, we need to build our treatment facilities. We have a lot of healthcare infrastructure that's not always used optimally, that we could start to transition some beds over to detox beds, and then we need to really start building on rehabilitation. And rehabilitation is a lifelong endeavor. And so do we have enough of an infrastructure here in Maine for that? No. But we can look at things, and I know down in Deer Isle they've been using a little bit of telehealth. People are having psychotherapy sessions with folks from far away through a video conference, bringing technologies into it so that we can reach people a little bit more, and certainly the drug replacement therapy. But the bottom line is that when we're treating someone who has an addiction, we need to treat that individual in the way that's best going to be successful for that person. There's no cookie cutter to this. So we need to have the whole gamut of interventions available for them, and we need to support that. And I'll just say one last thing. What's even more important than all of that is creating a culture that respects all people for being human and dignified. Just because they have a drug addiction doesn't make them any different than someone who has diabetes. And I know that's very difficult because some of the behaviors that are associated with drug addiction are really offensive and difficult and painful. But we're not going to have an infrastructure that's supportive and curative if we don't like people who have taken drugs. So that's something that we really need to work about. And the vilification of people who use drugs has not been helpful coming from the administration. Thanks, sorry.
Thank you. Would you like to hear the question again?
No. I attended a Healthy Acadia, and I think several other sponsors that put together a panel at the Ellsworth High School. You attended that. I remember seeing you there. And I thought it was extraordinary, mostly because, for me, it left me feeling optimistic about our capacity to deal with this issue. We've been hiding it under the rug for quite a long time. Families have felt ashamed. Addicts feel ashamed. We've dealt with it through fear and enforcement. Particularly leadership in the governor's office has pointed to addiction as a more of a moral issue, and that and the people who are involved deserve to be whatever, put in jail or whatever. It is a complex issue. I know in the military, for example, there are a lot of vets who come back with a lot of stress. I had a son who was one of them, who ended up in trouble with drugs as a way of self-medicating and dealing with the stresses they had in war. And I think on all fronts, we're learning more about how to treat addiction. And I think Maura has pointed out a number of those. But I feel, having gone to that workshop, where the sheriff was there too, it felt like there was a much more open and compassionate approach to deal with addiction. So it's going to be a tough job, but I think we can get there.
If I could just mention, Steve, Ted mentioned Healthy Acadia. They have a fabulous program that's been going to town throughout the county and Washington County as well. And they also have a great program of prevention that goes into the schools. But they are feeling some pushback from some of the schools to get into there and do some of the prevention effort. And so that's another thing that we really need to be promoting in all our communities, that we're open to this and we recognize what a serious problem it is.
Thank you. Ted, would you like to have one more?
Not really. No, no. I couldn't come up with things. I'm usually pretty good at just going on anonymous, but I'm doing fine.
All right. Well, this last question from the audience starts out with you, Ted. One of the balancing acts of a legislator is to both work on constituent services and collaborate within your party and across the aisle to pass legislation affecting many voters. As a state senator, how would you approach this balance?
Well, as a state representative, that was the nexus in which I worked. When I was at College of the Atlantic, I was given an assignment to bring business leaders and environmental leaders together to discuss about the future of economics and the environment and Maine's future. And that experience, which went on for some years, introduced me to the perspectives of various sides of things. And when I got into the legislature, maybe it's because I grew up in a Republican family, I got along really well with most of the Republicans. And I could always find some piece of work that we all could see value in and put our differences aside and work on that particular opportunity. And I enjoyed that. I enjoyed that engagement with others, looking for solutions. Peter Mills, for example, you know Peter. Peter and I co-chaired a committee, a Community Preservation Advisory Committee, and we wanted to work on affordable housing. And one of the things that came up was a tax increment financing. He's a lawyer, and he said, well, why don't we take the TIF law and turn it upside down and make it do something for affordable housing? And we worked on that, and we passed it. And Leonard Lake Senior Housing is partly financed by that TIF law. But Peter loved solving problems. He was like a Labrador Retriever. You'd throw a ball, and he'd just go for that ball and wag his tail and come back for another one. He liked solving problems. Was he a partisan? Yeah. Was he opposed to bonds? Yeah. There are differences. But we were very congenial, and we worked on things, and we enjoyed finding that common ground and making something happen.
Thank you. Ms. O'Neill?
Part of the question, if I remember correctly, was about how you balance constituency work with the work of the Senate chamber. And I would say that the constituency work is so important, and it's actually what I've enjoyed most about. I'm not doing constituency work, but I'm out talking to folks in the county, and it's really been instructive for me. I kind of compare this to nursing and to teaching nursing, because we, in nursing faculty, often will have clinical practices because that keeps them always up to date with what's going on out in the practice, and they can better teach that way. Nursing in general, we follow certain frameworks, and the nursing process always starts with assessment. So in order to understand your community and what you need to do, you have to assess it, and that's sort of a constant thing. We're always sort of scanning the horizon to see what's going on in the community or the person that we're talking to. So being out with the constituents and hearing their concerns and their problems and their questions would certainly feed any work that you would do in the state Senate. So that's something that I would welcome. And actually on issues of one of my pet peeves is the low voter turnout and the problem of people not really being involved. And I would love to see legislators spend a lot of times in grammar school when they're off or on weekend or whenever they're not in session, to be able to be working with kids to make sure that they understand the process and bring them in, not just to pass legislation on making the lobster the state crustacean, but I think that kids have the wherewithal, even at very young ages, to understand altruistic sort of ideals. And so working to pass legislation that would make sure that none of their classmates are hungry would be a wonderful opportunity for them to understand the real value and essence of government. So those are the things that I would look for. In terms of getting along and getting things done in the Senate chamber, as a nurse, we just don't ever have the opportunity to walk away from a problem. We have to stay and we have to work through it. So I'm used to that. As an advocate and an ombudsman, I was a mediator, so I was used to bringing people to the table. Oftentimes hearing that, wow, we never came to the table like this before. If we had, maybe we would have solved this problem a long time ago. So those are the sorts of things that I'm good at and that I would enjoy doing.
Thank you.
When I was doing door-to-door in the House, I had about 2,500 households to visit. And, you get a walking list, Democrats, Republican, enrolled. After a couple of terms, I stopped using them. I just started going down every street and knock on the door. And one day I got to a door and I knocked and said, "Hi, I'm Ted Koffman." He said, "I know who you are." And I thought, uh-oh, what did I do? And I looked at him and he said, "You're the fellow who helped my son get into a group home. And they were going to take him out of the home, and I called you, and you fixed it." I don't keep track of those sorts of things, but it's critically important to when you make a promise, you keep it, and you don't keep score. You just do it.
Moira, would you like to
No, thanks.
record?
That's great. That's a great story. Thanks for sharing it.
And we are down to closing statements, and Moria O'Neill will go first.
Okay. Well, I want to say again, thank you so much for this opportunity, for you guys being here, setting it up, and for the audience to be here. It's been a good discussion tonight. One of the great joys of running for office is knocking on doors and having an excuse to talk to people. In fact, some of the doors I've knocked on I've been passing for years, and now I know who lives there, and I know their story behind it, and that's really been a great privilege. People have made me feel right at home, and the stories that I've heard have been instructed. I started this race because I was outraged that the sitting senator representing me had been a deciding factor in 70,000 people not having health insurance. From my broad experience, I know intimately what that means for the individual who can't get a prescription filled. And I know what it means for frustrated nurses who see the same patients coming back and forth all the time because they don't get that prescription filled. And I know how it impacts hospitals that don't get care compensated for. And I know how it impacts the school performance of someone who's not getting the care they need, or work performance and employees' bottom lines. So for me, health care has been the key issue that warranted stopping everything and running for office to offer my assistance. But since I've been out talking with folks, and even here tonight, I've learned about so many other issues that need attention. I mean, the idea of transportation between here and Bangor, as simple as a bus or a couple of vans that are shared, is just brilliant, and I don't know why I didn't think about that all these years I've been driving back and forth. I know that our aging community here needs the same kind of help that my mother gets from me, but I didn't know that our housing stock is deteriorating because seniors are overwhelmed in maintaining their homes. And I didn't know the economic impact of vehicle repair on lobstermen's vehicles when they're moving product up Route 15 that's crumbling before our eyes. I always ask people to tell me what's on their minds, and most of the time they say, "Oh, nothing, really." And then if I linger for a moment, it will spill. The daughter who was sent far away to access drug treatment, or the grandson whose educational program doesn't address his impulsivity, or the older couple suddenly faced with end-of-life decisions, sitting in their living room talking to a stranger, not knowing where to begin. So the pleasure in this has been that together we've actually already been able to solve some, we haven't actually solved the problems, but we've figured out where to start. And that is very empowering both for me and the people I'm talking about. This is the essence of government. It's people putting their heads together to figure out the best way to pursue happiness. And it's something that I hope to continue to work on as the next state senator.
Thank you. Ted Koffman?
After 8 years of rewarding legislative service, I joined Maine Audubon as executive director in 2009. And then I continued my work with my staff on policies on climate change, as well as ecologically based siting policies for wind power installations and restoration of fish passage, including the extraordinary Penobscot River Restoration Project for alewives and other species to spawn in our lakes and ponds. And I regularly visited the legislature again, not as a legislator, but as an executive director, to testify to support conservation and alternative energy policy. During my 5 years at Audubon, I watched Governor LePage and his legislative supporters attempt to repeal or reverse the progress achieved in prior decades. He seems to drive by looking in the rearview mirror and sending us in the wrong direction. It was gut-wrenching to witness outstanding public servants, former colleagues, who were implementing climate change plans at the DEP, the Department of Environmental Protection, getting sacked and sidelined, much like the Bush administration curtailing climate policy for 8 years. My Audubon team supported alternative energy and conservation, while LePage urged hydro from Quebec and a new costly natural gas pipeline that would make Maine dependent on fossil fuel for decades to come. As executive director at Audubon, I was also responsible for providing health insurance for 30 employees. And I learned how challenging it is during a recession to come up with reasonable health insurance policies, but also that introduced me to the national system and its flaws. And then heard about Mr. Langley and his position on expanding Medicaid. So I'm eager and prepared to contribute to sustainable economic development in Hancock County and in Maine, and provide access to affordable health care and support a strong educational system. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our presentations. I would remind the audience that the candidates had 3 questions for which they could prepare and 6 questions that came spontaneously, and I thought their answers were very well thought out and excellent. Thank you.